this interesting talk. Really interesting. Thank you all for the stimulating, interesting, and also important contributions. Before we come to the questions in this block, I understand my task as moderator to be to place the articles or the talks in the context of the topic of the panel, which is the new globalization and countering populism. Also in the invitation letter, I was explicitly asked to deliver a speech on the specific topic of the new globalization and countering populism. However, given the time constraints, I will refrain from such a speech here, but I only will say a few sentences about my understanding of the topic and the classification of the lectures given. Given the specific topic of the panel, the new globalization and countering populism, some listeners, including me, may have missed statements to clarify what exactly is meant by globalization versus new globalization. Here, we heard a lot about new forms of international cooperation. However, the question remains open to what extent this is to be understood as an expression of new globalization. In the macroeconomic, political economic sense, globalization is measured as the relative growth rate of international exchange activities in terms of international trade, international financial transactions, labor migration, exchange of knowledge and technologies in relation to GDP growth. In this respect, one cannot speak, for example, of trendy deglobalization, what some call the new globalization in political economics. But one can speak of pauses, slight declines after the two mega crises, the global financial crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic, with its disruption of credit and supply chains. Only a hot and, or at least cold war, in which China is also actively involved, would trigger this. Therefore, in this sense, there is no new globalization. But I guess that in the political science sense, the changes in the new forms of international cooperation and collaboration were more central here and have served to justify what is meant as new globalization. The first part of my comment. The second, and more importantly, we heard little in this panel about countering populism. That is, about the possibilities and appropriate measures for reacting to or pushing back populism. In addition, there is the question of the pros and cons of populism in the first place, where populism should really be evaluated as exclusively negative, as it is made out to be in most political science writings. In a recent article, I am currently addressing the question of what role populism plays for economic development, for poverty reduction in developing countries, as well as for overcoming the middle income trap in emerging countries. For example, I remember discussions when I was professor of economics at Princeton University in 1991-92. I gave a lecture at the politics department about stabilizing the transformation process in the Eastern European transformation countries. And we discussed a lot at this time, 30 years ago, about the role of such a kind of populist programs for stabilizing these countries. The economists never had this idea. When I argued about such ideas in another lecture at the economics department, people like Ben Bernanke, my colleague, told me what all this talk is about. Give them 20 or 40 billion dollars and everything will work out. No feeling, but in the politics department, there was still a feeling about the role of something like populist programs in the beginning of transformation programs. That's only an example for looking more differently at the topics. And the other one is middle income traps. In the last 6 years, I have dealt with the latter, the preconditions for overcoming the middle income trap in more than I think a dozen articles in academic journals and in a book entitled The Economic Rise of East Asia, the Development Path of Japan, South Korea, and China, published by Springer Publishing House. When I look at these from this, I cannot see any clear necessity, even in these countries, of the exclusively negative evaluation of populism for certain periods in the development, especially in transition countries. That's only was a personal comment on this topic. There's not a reproach to the speakers nor to the organizer, because you can only present what you have, and you can only put together in a panel what you are offered. Therefore, that's only personal feelings about this topic from the view of a macroeconomist and a political economist, not a political scientist. Now we have, I think,